And now we have chapter 2 of Peter Pan. And here is the cover with Captain Hook and Peter Pan. Okay, we've got a small picture of Tinkerbell. Okay, chapter 2. Come away, come away. The next night, Mr. and Mrs. Darling went out to a dinner party. The Darling children wanted to stay awake when Peter arrived, but somehow they always fell fast asleep before he did. Later that night, while the children slept, Nana walked in to check on them. She saw a strange boy entering through the window, so she growled and jumped on him. He leapt out lightly through the window. As he reached forward to pull the window shut, he saw something hanging from Nana's mouth. It was his shadow. Nana's got his shadow. After Nana left the room, a teeny glowing light flew inside quickly. It went inside cupboards and drawers as if looking for Peter's shadow. The moving light was actually a teeny fairy called Tinkerbell. A minute later, after she entered, the windows burst open and Peter flew in. "Tinkerbell," he called out to her softly so that the children wouldn't wake up. "Tink, where are you? Tink, tell me where they put my shadow." The loveliest tinkle, like that of golden bells, answered him. It was fairy language. She told him that the shadow was in the chest of drawers. Peter went to the chest immediately, scattering its contents on the floor. Tinkerbell entered the drawer to help him. When he finally found his shadow, he was so happy that he shut the drawer with Tinkerbell in it. Peter went to the bathroom and tried sticking his shadow back on using soap. When the shadow kept slipping off, he sat on the floor and began to cry. His sobs woke Wendy up. "Boy, why are you crying?" she asked. In response, Peter stood on his feet and bowed beautifully as a mark of courtesy to her. She was so pleased that from her bed she curtsied equally well. "What's your name?" he asked. "Wendy Mariah Angela Darling. What's your name?" "Peter Pan." "Is that all?" "Yes," he replied sharply, realizing how short his name was next to her name. When she asked where he lived, he told her that he lived on the second star to the right and straight on till morning. "That's a funny address," she replied. "It is not," he countered back. "Do you have a mother?" she asked. He remained silent and lowered his head. "Oh dear, no wonder you've been crying." She climbed off her bed and went to him. "I wasn't crying because I don't have a mother. I was crying because I couldn't get my shadow to stick," Peter said. "It has to be sewn on. I'll do it for you," said Wendy. As she sewed the shadow back on, she noticed that he was clenching his teeth because of the pain. Once she was done, he jumped around the room with joy. Unfortunately, he forgot to give Wendy the credit. There she is, sewing his shadow on. He forgot to give Wendy the credit and thought that he had sewed the shadow back on himself. "How clever I am," he crowed rapturously. "Oh, the cleverness of me." Wendy was shocked. Peter said, "Wendy, I can't help being this way when I'm happy. One girl is always more useful than 20 boys, you know." "Do you really think so?" she asked, and Peter solemnly nodded. Wendy happily got out of bed and told him that she would give him a kiss, but Peter didn't know what a kiss was, so he held out his hand to receive it. "Don't you know what a kiss is?" Wendy asked, shocked. "I'll know when you give it to me," Peter replied stiffly. She gave him a thimble so that his feelings wouldn't be hurt. "May I kiss you now?" Peter asked Wendy. "If you like," she replied primly, slowly inclining her face toward his. But Peter just dropped an acorn button into her hand. Blushing slightly, she thanked him and put the acorn button around the chain she wore. It was lucky she did, for that very acorn button turned out to save her life later. "How old are you?" Wendy asked Peter. "I don't know exactly, but I'm young," he said. "I ran away from home to look for fairies the day I was born." "But some of us don't believe in fairies anymore," Wendy said gravely. "Don't say that," Peter cried. "Each time you say something like not believing in fairies, somewhere a fairy drops dead." He got up and called out to Tinker Bell. "Peter, is there a fairy in this room?" Wendy asked. "She was here. Can you hear her?" "Only the sound of tinkling bells." "That, Wendy, is the language of fairies," Peter said. He noticed the sound was coming from the chest of drawers. He laughed. "I think I've locked her in there by mistake." After he let the poor fairy out, she flew all over him, making agitated signs with her hands. "Now, Tink, don't say that. I didn't mean to lock you in there." "Peter, I would like to see her. Can she hold still?" cried Wendy. When Tinker Bell finally settled on top of the table, Wendy gushed on how beautiful the fairy was. "Tink," said Peter amiably, "this lady says she wishes you were her fairy." Tinker Bell shook her head insolently. There we go. Peter Pan and Wendy and Tinker Bell. "What does she say, Peter?" asked Wendy. Peter had to translate. "She is not very polite. She says you're an ugly girl and that she's my fairy." Wendy sat down on an armchair and passed Peter whom he lived with. He told her that he lived with the Lost Boys. "Who are they?" she asked. "They are those children whose nurses lost them when they are babies, and if not found in a week, they are sent to Neverland." "I'm their captain," declared Peter. Wendy asked if there were any girls there. "No, girls are too clever to fall out of prams," said Peter. "I think," Wendy said, "it is perfectly lovely the way you talk about girls. John there just hates girls." In reply, Peter rose and kicked John out of bed, blankets and all, in one kick. There he is, kicking him out of bed. John and Michael got up. Hearing all the noise in the nursery, Mrs. Darling came in to check. It was dark in the nursery, and the children hid behind the curtains and made angelic breathing sounds as though they were asleep. Mrs. Darling thought it was Nana who was being naughty. She woke Mr. Darling, who went and tied poor Nana up in the kennel. After they had left, Wendy asked Peter if he came every night. She was mildly disappointed to find out he came to hear her stories, not to see her. Just then, Peter grabbed her hand and started pulling her toward the window. "Peter, let me go," she cried. "Come back with me. You can tell the Lost Boys some of your stories," he pleaded. There he is, taking her hand. "But I can't," said Wendy sadly. "I don't even know how to fly." "I'll teach you." How could she resist? "Of course, it's awfully fascinating," she said. "Peter, would you teach John and Michael to fly too?" He nodded, so Wendy happily asked John and Michael if they would like to learn how to fly. "I say, Peter, can you really fly?" asked John, putting on his glasses. Instead of answering him, Peter flew around the room, taking the mantelpiece on the way. Both John and Michael clapped their hands with glee. They asked how they could fly. Peter grabbed some fairy dust from Tinker Bell and blew it all over them. He then told them to think happy thoughts. They closed their eyes and thought of their happiest memory. When they opened their eyes again, they were airborne. They all cried out their joy and shock. "Look at me, I'm flying!" "I'll be taking you to a land where there are mermaids." "Mermaids!" cried Wendy. "And pirates," said Peter. "Pirates!" cried John and Michael. "Let's go!" they all cried. Led by Tinker Bell and Peter, the three Darling children went out, flying through the window into the twinkling stars. And that is the end of Chapter 2 of Peter Pan.